All right. Testing, 1, 2, 3. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another live stream. Got some fun stuff here planned for you. Particularly if you're interested in quitting porn. So let's see, make sure everything's running all right. Seems like it. Make sure scenes are working. Cool. All right. Well, hey, fellas. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be doing the next episode of the Porn Free Path series, where really I'm just showing you guys how to quit porn. You know, I've been in this business for like 12 years now, been helping people quit porn, quit myself. And at least at one point, I think I'd probably helped more guys quit porn than anyone else in the world, like directly, like one-on-one or one to, to groups and that kind of thing. And, there's a lot of stuff out there that's, great in terms of science and best practices and things like that. But what I'm going to be sharing with you guys today is something that really just came to me through just working with so many people and seeing like where they would get stuck, where they would get challenged, and that sort of thing. And in particular, what we're going to be getting into here is how to complete your 90-day reboot. And what I've found is that through different stages of the reboot, you're going to require different things. Like if you want to get that porn-free life, you want to heal your brain, you want to reboot yourself, you want to be, able to tap into your productivity, your motivation, your focus, you want to fix your sexuality, your relationships, like all this other kind of stuff. Well, you got to reboot your brain, and that's pretty common knowledge in the porn recovery community. But the issue is obviously getting to that 90 days. So many guys, they try and they fail and they try and they fail and they try and they fail. And the worst time I think where people really struggle is where they can consistently get decent-ish streaks. Like for example, they are, hitting, 3 weeks to a month to maybe 2 months clean, and then they keep relapsing there. And it gets super, super frustrating. So what I'm going to be doing today is walking you through exactly what you should be focusing on at each stage of your porn reboot, and how like you got to be optimized, like using your energy, right? Because you can't do everything all the time. And so I'm going to give you kind of like a cheat sheet of exactly what you need to focus on. All right. So let's go ahead and get into this here. I even drew up some fun little graphics for you guys. So what we've got here is the porn reboot timeline. All right. And as you can see, we've got all the weeks up here, all the way to, our 90-day goal. And so if we break it down, I see 5 distinct stages. Like first, we've got like the first week, 0 to 7 days. Then we've got the second phase, which is like 8 to 21 days. And the third, 22 to 49. And then the fourth, 50 to 90. And then we've got this special spot up here where we're going 90 plus. And a lot of guys miss this point as well. All right. So first thing we got to understand is that this process, it's not going to be linear. All right. It's going to look different for everyone. A lot of it depends on like where you're coming from. Like if you're coming from using porn 3 times a day versus someone who's using it once or twice a week, some of this stuff is going to be different. There's going to be some fluctuations. Additionally, like just like your level of self-development, the stuff you have going on in your life, all these kind of things can affect what you're going through. But still, I would say that there is very, very general trends for each of these stages. Someone says, this is defo pre-recorded. No, it's not. Connection is bad. Let me know if the connection is bad, but it should be all right. It says the connection's great, so maybe it's your connection. So yeah, there you go. Not pre-recorded. Okay. I'll make sure that I'm recording this locally, so when I do the upload, I'll do the local recording, so that should be higher quality when I do the edit down and stuff. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into this next piece here, where I'm talking about the level of difficulty that you can expect. All right, so 0 to 7 days, this is probably the one that's most variable in terms of like initial difficulty. It's kind of like, are you coming from 3 times a day, or are you coming from a couple times a week? So it might be higher for some people, like in terms of the average challenge, but in general, it's going to be not the worst to get to 7 days. Then when you start getting into, weeks 2 and 3, definitely starts to spike up a little bit. But what I've found is the big sticking point for most guys is this 22 to 49 day period. And for some guys, this is going to be where like flat lines start to hit and a lot of the deeper stuff starts to come up, which we'll be getting into here. And obviously this thing is bouncing up and down, because one of the things to be clear on, which is really helpful to know when you are rebooting, is that, yeah, there's going to be discomfort, but it's not going to be like constant discomfort. All right. Like the reality is most of the times your periods of craving and discomfort, they're going to be temporary, maybe 15 minutes, in general. Sometimes you're going to have longer periods where it feels like I've just been craving and going crazy all day, having like massive withdrawal symptoms like all day. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more later, but usually that means you're missing something important that we're going to, break down in detail. But in general, it's just like you've got spikes. And just to make it kind of clear to you, there's a finite number of spikes for you to get through your reboot. Like, it's kind of comforting to remind yourself that, like, all right, there's only so many cravings that I'm going to have to feel. All right. It's not infinite. And you definitely don't want to fall into this lie of thinking like, oh, this is the way I feel right now. This is the way life without porn feels. Just a state of deprivation and itching and just like feeling like you're going crazy. That's not what it's going to be. It's going to get much, much easier. And in fact, like once you get past this 49-day mark, you still might have, a few big spikes of craving, but they get way less frequent and usually their intensity starts to decrease. All right. And there is a little bump that happens then post 90 where things get a little bit tricky because you're playing a different game. But if you do what I recommend, then it should be really smooth for how you're going to make your progress here. Okay. So let's start looking at these stages. All right. And we're going to start down here with phase 1. All right. Just getting that first 7 days. So what do we got to do here? In phase 1, our main focus is going to be buy-in. All right. So what the heck's buy-in? Buy-in is basically just your decision to do this and understanding your why. You have to know why the heck you're quitting porn. Because as long as you know why you're quitting porn, what you stand to gain from it, then you can pull that up in your mind when you have a craving. It's like, no, I want this other thing in my life more than I want porn. And so, for example, this could be something like, I want to improve my relationship with my wife, or I want to get a girlfriend, or I want to increase my productivity, or I want to be able to find pleasure in the more normal, natural things in life. If you go back and watch the first episode of my Porn-Free Path series, I do a super big deep dive into all of the ways that porn holds you back and all the things you stand to gain by quitting. So, that's something that's why I put that video in the very beginning of this series, because if you have buy-in, you can pretty much coast on that for at least the first week if you have it locked in. At least most people can. Obviously, there's always going to be some edge cases where people are really struggling with things, but in general, if you're buy-in strong, you know why you're doing this and you really want it, then you'll be able to sacrifice porn. And frankly, buy-in never stops being important. It always is important. So you always want to try and check in on it. Cause one of the worst things that you could do is just forget why you're doing it. Right. That's one of the biggest downfalls of a guy in recovery, is that he just kind of just disconnects. He just, forgets what he's doing. And this ironically tends to happen when a reboot's going well. Maybe you haven't had any cravings. You've been sailing pretty clear and smooth for a while, but then you just kind of just forget you're doing this thing. And then all of a sudden, you get blindsided by cravings. You're not really prepared. Your head isn't really in the game. And then you'll relapse. And so, this is where having some kind of constant connection to this process is useful, which is, why I have my whole Frontline Man community, where we're constantly interacting with the guys, driving them forward, giving them daily things to do. And so, you know what? I actually think I forgot to put the link in this recording here. But if you check one of the other previous videos I uploaded, you can get a free training that'll give you access to, more information about how to join my community. But in general, what we got to do is just keep our head in the game and just try and do that. So joining a community, having some kind of like daily practice that connects you with this stuff is really, really powerful. So if you get your buy-in, you're probably going to be able to get to, your 7 days. But there's other things we can start looking at here. And when I say begin, I'm not saying we got to go hard on this stuff, because really we want the focus up here on the buy-in, but you can start thinking about this stuff within the first week. And this is craving mitigation and trigger response. So what the heck is this stuff? So craving mitigation, really, it's really just like blocking cravings before they start. Okay, so that's all we're trying to do is like, how can we stop cravings from coming? And we'll talk more about that in the next section because it becomes more important. And then trigger response is really just like, what do you do when triggered? Okay. And you can just start thinking about these things because, it becomes very important in our next stage here. So once we get past week 1 and we start moving into, week 2 and 3 and that sort of thing, we got to get a little bit more tactical. We got to really start dialing in how we're going to be handling this because, for some guys, buy-in alone could get them to 30 days or beyond. I've seen some people get to 90 days just if they have a really strong reason to quit porn. But for most of us, it's really just going to get us started. And so after that point, we got to really have some technique to make sure that we can, stay clean. So let's talk about this. Our focus then is going to be those other two things we started previously, craving mitigation and trigger response. So let's figure out like what these things might be. So craving mitigation, this could be stuff like blockers. So like porn blockers, for example. These would be, porn blockers are not something you want to use as like your primary means of defense, but they're great because if you can reduce the number of triggering images you see, well, then that's awesome. You're less likely to get triggered and less likely to relapse then, right? And so, setting up those kind of filters can be really useful. Even just generally in terms of productivity, having a blocker in, like even if there's all these softwares now that you can do timed blockers and stuff where it's like between this period and this period, I can't access YouTube or something like that. And those are great. Another thing might be, like electronic schedule. Electronics schedule. So this would be stuff like I'm not going to be looking at my phone after a certain time at night. So for example, these could be like this. That's one of the things that most guys struggle with is in the end of the day, when they're tired, they have low willpower, low awareness. What do? Well, they just scroll. And once they get in that zombie scrolling mode, eventually their likelihood of making a bad click, leading to something that's not really great for them, well, it tends to, devolve into something not good, right? It tends to lead to porn. So just by deciding, all right, at 8 p.m., I'm going to plug my phone in and I'm going to put it in a drawer or whatever the heck you want to do, it can help a lot with that kind of stuff. And as you get more aware of your patterns, you can really target these sort of things. So like you start to identify, at what point in my day am I'm most likely to get triggered. Maybe it's first thing in the morning. Some guys use porn as a wake-up call. Okay, so, in that case, you don't want to have access to your phone right there. For some guys, it's like, if they typically family guys, they shouldn't bring their phone into the bathroom or something like that. These sort of things, like as you begin to understand your patterns, you can just figure out, how can I break that pattern? And this will do a lot to, help you avoid temptations and that kind of stuff. So there's a million different things that you can do here, and I'll probably do deep dives into all of this stuff in future streams. But yeah, generally what you want to be starting to really think about in this period of the reboot, week 2, 3, is how are you going to block this stuff, and trying to get consistent with it. And don't overload yourself. Just try and hit the big points, the big areas, because you don't want to fall into the trap of thinking that through craving mitigation alone, you're going to be able to get through a reboot with no cravings. It's just not possible. All right. It's just a losing battle, and it puts your energy in the wrong spot, because ultimately we got to do some deeper inner work, because, you would like, I would assume, to be a guy who can avoid using porn no matter what happens to them. It's like, I remember when I wanted to quit porn, I wanted to be able to not just live my life terrified of seeing sexual imagery, right? I wanted to be able to, if I was somewhere and someone some weird dude just hey dude, look at this hot porn scene, I could see it and be like, that's weird that you're doing that, and walk away and not be triggered and be fine. All right. And the only way you can do that is if you really do the inner work. So that should be the main focus, but at the same time, you're dumb to not do some of these more structural craving mitigation sort of strategies, okay? So next piece here is our trigger response. And so with the trigger response, you need to have both an external plan and an internal plan. So what does this mean? So the external plan is probably the simplest one. And what we're talking about here is that if you notice yourself getting triggered, what do you go do, right? And I like to describe these immediate kind of reflex reactions as clearing actions. They're really designed to help protect you from making a dumb move, to interrupt your pattern, get you doing something else, right? So a default thing might be shut down any electronics that you're currently interacting with and go for a walk, right? Going for a walk sounds so simple, but it does a lot of things. One, it'll get you away from your electronics. You're probably not going to relapse while walking around outside, at least I hope not. And it's going to give you some fresh air, going to get some blood flowing. It's likely going to release some neurochemicals that are favorable to you, give you some space and time to start reflecting in a safe environment and start doing the internal plan. And so the internal plan stuff, this is something that I've spent a long time working on, and I go super in depth into it in my Frontline Man content. But basically what we're trying to do is use internal pattern interrupts. And one of the most, the first and most important thing that you can do on the internal level, after probably taking a deep breath, acknowledging that you're triggered, is asking yourself, what do I really want here? Because what a craving is basically it's a lie. It's a lie that says, hey, I want this thing. I want porn. But that's not really what you want. Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing a porn reboot, right? And so when we ask ourselves, what do I want? What we're trying to do is we're trying to actually shift past this higher level where the like buzzy sort of, intense level of our craving. And we're trying to shift down into a deeper part of ourself. I call it the heart shift. And so what we're doing is we're trying to connect to something deeper here. What do I really want in this moment? And sometimes it's going to be something like, I just want to break. And that's where taking a walk is great. Or maybe it's I'm hungry. Or maybe it's I want to get this work done. Or maybe it's, I want to, I got to talk to my wife about this fight we got in last night. Or maybe it's I'm stressed at work and I got to come up with a plan for how to save my job or something like that. All right. It's always going to be contextual. But the key thing here is recognizing that you have something deeper that you're looking for. Because when you have this awareness, it then gives you a place to put your energy, because what we want to avoid is like the pink elephant problem. And this would be like when, here's the pink elephant problem. It's like, don't think about a pink elephant. Do everything you can not to think about a pink elephant. Are you thinking about a pink elephant? You're thinking about a pink elephant, right? Because you can't, the brain is really bad at just doing the negative of a command. So when you say, don't think about porn, don't use porn, don't use porn, porn is bad. It's like just all that's coming up in your head is porn, 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 porn. And your brain's an associative machine, and it's going to start building imagery and all this other kind of crap. And so what we want to do instead is shift our energy to something else. And we cannot do that properly unless we know what the heck we want. And when we find that thing, so for me, back when I was quitting porn, one of the biggest things that I wanted to get some freaking work done, because I was trying to work for myself and I just couldn't do it because I just kept getting stressed out. And then I would turn to porn and video games and escape and that sort of thing. And it didn't work out well for me. And so by learning how to connect with, well, what do I really want? Well, okay, what I really want is just get this stupid task done. And so, once I recognized that, I was able to start just doing that thing. And guess what? That starts to relieve my internal pressure, and, things start to improve. The craving starts to get addressed. And this goes in to the next big thing that you want to be starting to pay attention to at this stage. All right. And this is solving your core pains. All right. So what you've got to understand about porn is that it is an escape behavior. Now, escape from what? Well, it's an escape from pain. That's what you're escaping from. You've got some kind of unmet desire inside of you. Maybe it's a desire for, more career success. Maybe it's romantic success. Maybe it's, you're lonely. Maybe, you just feel physically crappy because you don't take care of yourself. But like all of these things, these unmet desires, if they're not addressed, they create pain. And so porn becomes a way for us to kind of turn that pain off temporarily. Now, obviously, when we do this, it just makes things worse, and it's not good, right? So we have to start thinking about this. And at this, 18 to 21 day stage, it's one of those great spots to start really taking inventory of like, what the heck do I want in my life? Particularly, what are the big pains that I'm not properly addressing that's driving my escapism? And you don't need to have this fully figured out, and you might not even be able to, because when guys get into the habit of turning off the pain of their unmet desires, like habitually, what kind of occurs is that they just default to that. It's like they've done it so many times that they've lost sight of what they even want in the first place, right? It's like if you've wanted a relationship for so long, but you haven't had one, like a romantic relationship, and you just keep repressing that desire with porn, you might forget that that's actually something you deeply, deeply want. Because anytime that pain comes up, your brain just processes it as, oh, guess it's time to use porn again. It's just like, give me my medicine. And it just asks for porn. So like, as you stop acting on the porn urge, this stuff's going to start coming up. All right. And this is where we start moving into the trickier phase of things. All right. This is phase 3 of your porn reboot. And this is probably the most difficult part that most guys really get stuck on, because it's at this point that all that deep stuff starts to come up. So what do we got to do here? We have to really focus on solving these core pains. You can't, so many guys, they cannot get past this point until they take this seriously. So what this means is like really giving yourself permission to get down and dirty with your, deep, dark issues. Okay. And you got to do some soul searching. You got to figure out like, what the heck do I not have in my life that's hurting me? Probably one of the top ones for guys is some kind of loneliness or lack of connection. But that's not the only thing. There's a lot of guys who are, very high performers. They got great families and things like that. But their big issue is that they're constantly stressed and they just want more peace. They want more relaxation. They want more security. Okay. And these things can be scary to look at because their answers may not be immediately obvious. And, it can be daunting, right? And that's probably why we escape from them in the first place. It's why we use porn, because it's so much easier. It's like, if you're someone who doesn't know how to get a girlfriend, or you're scared of getting a girlfriend or something like that, well then, that seems like a big daunting task. So it's like, oh, I don't want to deal with that. Let's just use some porn, right? Or if you're, an entrepreneur with kids at home and your wife's mad at you and you're constantly pulled in a million different directions, figuring out how to solve that, at first glance, it's like, oh, there's no way around this. It's just going to suck right now. There's nothing I can do. And then you get overwhelmed and then you just, use porn to cope. But the thing is, you can always make your situation better. And porn is an example of making your situation worse. So it's like, what we got to do, you have to find what the heck is underneath this. What's the big battery, the big pain battery of unmet desire that's driving me to escape in the first place? And how can I start fixing it? And so, in my Frontline Man program, we've got 3 big questions that we use to break this down. What do I want? How can I win? And who will I be? So what do I want? It's like, okay, well, I want, more relaxation. I don't want to be so stressed all the time. It's like, well, how can I win? Right? And so this is where we move into a brainstorming phase where we start to think about, well, maybe I can't solve all of these problems, but how could I maybe improve some of it? Right? It's like work stress. Maybe it's like, well, I could probably just get my schedule a little bit better. I could be more disciplined with my time. Maybe I could just prioritize my efforts better and that sort of thing. And then the who will I be part's about dialing into the mindset of the man who can do this stuff, like the man who loves getting his shit together, the man who loves being more on point, right? Same sort of thing with the dating thing. It's like, all right, well, what do I want? I want a romantic relationship. Either, I want to rekindle a dead bedroom with my wife, or I want to get a girlfriend or something like that. Say, well, how can I win? Well, come up with the options, all right? And sometimes one of the options is maybe I just need to do some research. Like, I don't know how to date at all. I don't what are the strategies? I don't know, watch a few YouTube videos on it. Get some ideas, come up with something. How do I fix my marriage? I don't know, maybe it's therapy. Maybe it's, visiting some of the, relationship advice on YouTube. Like there's, the thing is, like, there's infinite information out there as long as you're willing to start looking at things and just creating a list of options. Okay. And once you have a general idea and you can start working towards something, then you want to be moving into this state of, well, all right, how do I got to think about this? Right. Because you can't be making any sort of real progress and addressing your core pains if you're coming at it from the mindset that made you want to run away in the first place. So you got to start dialing into, who's the man that I want to be? How does he think about this? Well, maybe he looks at this as a great opportunity rather than some kind of stressful obligation. Maybe he looks at it as an adventure, as a game, as a chance to improve himself, to expand himself, to make connection, to do all of these things. So like the mindset piece is really big too. And the coolest thing is that when you go through this and you get an idea of how you can start addressing these pains, you don't need to actually succeed in order to see major results. All right. Like I'm not expecting at this, stage over here that you solve all your unmet desires. All right. That's just unrealistic for most people. But what's really cool about your brain is that as long as you're connecting with that part of you that's hurting and you're clearly, sincerely working to solving it, that part stops screaming. It stops setting off the alarm bells in your head that's driving your escapism to begin with. You just need to be making directional progress. So there's not all this like massive amounts of, pressure on you to solve these things. It's just to start moving, because it's kind of like, you feel the momentum. And if it's authentic, then you literally will feel it inside of you. And that part will feel like, oh, okay, finally, he's paying attention to me. He's not just squashing me with porn anymore. All right. And, that's the key. And so many guys, they miss this step in this stage of the reboot, because all this stuff as they go, they're, 22 days in without using porn, this stuff will start rising to the surface. And if they don't know what's going on here, they think that they're just going crazy. They think their cravings are just getting out of control. They're like, this is where guys will have the sensation of being triggered like all day, multiple days in a row. The reality is they're not actually triggered for porn all that time. What they're dealing with is the pain of their unmet desires just kind of like slamming into them. And so when you start addressing this stuff, it just goes back to something, just those cravings just become little spikes of challenge. Okay. So that's very, very important, and that's our main focus here. But at the same time, we also want to be maintaining these other pieces. We can't completely forget about them. Because even if you're solving your core pains, if you're doing silly stuff like scrolling late at night, you're not responding to your triggers, you've completely forgotten what your buy-in is, like what you're doing this for, well then, it's going to be a problem. So, you got to do that stuff still. Try and keep your thumb on that sort of thing. But, typically once you get, deeper into, this phase here, this kind of stuff, it doesn't require quite as much attention. Really, it should be mostly over here, but just with enough maintenance here so that you're not, falling off. So, all right, let's move on to our next part here. Phase 4 of a reboot. And this is the one where it kills me to see people fall at this point, because especially if they've done, these parts properly, there's no reason to relapse at phase 4 because you've kind of cleared the hard part. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to have any more intense cravings or spikes or that sort of thing. But in general, you've gotten through the worst of it. Now, the one thing that can kind of make things a little bit different is flatline. So and flatline can occur, usually happens somewhere in here. And let's explain what the heck flatline is. So flatline is actually a good sign. And what it is like guys will either process it in a number of different ways. One, it might feel like a total shutdown of your sexuality, and where like you're not getting boners, you're not getting any cravings, you have zero sexual interest. That's a good sign. That's a sign that your brain is rebooting. That sexual circuitry in your brain is kind of like going through the factory reset. And the biggest issue there is where guys will try and test themselves. It's like, all right, my wiener has been asleep for weeks now, and I'm terrified that I destroy my sexuality by giving up porn. And then they'll test themselves to be like, oh, I'll just put a little porn on and see if my equipment still works down there. It does, and usually that leads to a relapse, okay? So if you're having a sexual flatline, then just embrace that, because that just means you're on easy mode for a little while. Now, you can't completely take your foot off the gas, because you can still absolutely get, that flatline can end and the triggers and stuff can start coming back. So you don't want to just assume that this is how it's going to stay. But there's also another kind of flatline, and this is probably the more challenging one, which is an emotional flatline. And this, I think, has a lot more to do with the way that your dopamine receptors are being like reset. Because this will be where like things just don't seem interesting. You just don't feel like anything's, exciting at all. Like you have no motivation. Like not basically the dopamine is not flowing in any direction. And guys just will feel kind of depressed, lethargic, maybe irritable, and this sort of thing. And this is one of the things that you got to take into account when you approach a porn reboot, is that, yeah, there's going to be discomfort, right? Like you got to know that, and you got to sign up for that, and you got to be cool with it. But if you are, then you just got to tell yourself, hey, I'm just in a flatline. It's going to last for a little bit, and then I'm going to be fine. And usually the intensity and duration of a flatline depends on how heavy your usage has been. So if you're someone who's a hardcore user for a long time, then your flatline's likely to be a little bit more intense and longer. And if not, well, then it's probably going to be a little less intense. Now, there's variability in that. Don't freak out if you're kind of an edge case. But in general, flatline will clear up after a little bit, and then you'll start seeing these, like the sunshine will start breaking through, and you'll start having these days where you feel better than you felt, in years maybe. And that's where it's exciting. Just know that it's going to still stay up and down, and be willing to stay with the process. So at this stage, phase 4, what do we want to be focusing on? Well, really, this is about maintenance. The big point of this stage here is just maintain what you're doing. Solving core pains, craving mitigation, trigger response buy-in. So, you're looking at regularly what's causing me pain. What are these unmet desires that are bothering me? How can I address them? How can I keep myself from getting triggered? That stuff should be kind of an autopilot. Your trigger response, you want to have that good. So like, do I know what I do if I get triggered? Do I know what I say to myself when I get triggered? And then not forgetting why you're doing this, right? So that's all pretty straightforward. And if you do that, especially if you're in a community like Frontline Man, well, we make this really easy because you're kind of just in an environment where you're constantly doing this sort of work, and it's very difficult to let the ball drop, which is a big reason why we really focus on creating an environment for deep habit change and self-mastery, because it just makes this part so much easier if you just stay, connected to it. But there's another thing that you can start doing here at this stage, and that is frontline advancement. So frontline advancement is sort of like solving core pains, but it's a little bit more fun because what this part is about is like when you start thinking about where do I really want to go in my life, right? Not just about how do I stop my bleeding neck issues, how do I fix those? That would be the solving the core pains, but like what's actually going to move my life to the next level, right? Maybe it's the next level of your career. Maybe it's the next level of your relationships. Maybe it's your fitness goals, your, goals with your art or your hobbies. Maybe it's like being more socially engaged, all of these kinds of things. Basically, it's like, how do I start creating a life I do not want to escape from? That's the big thing. So that's actually worth writing down here. This is the key of frontline advancement. It's like, how do you create a life you don't want to escape from, right? One you love, one you want to be engaged with, right? If you can start thinking about this and start moving toward this, then you're going to be doing pretty good. Now, for a lot of guys, when you're still in that 90-day period, this is not the time to make massive life shifts. So, it's not the time to usually start that new business, because that's going to bring a whole new level of stressors and challenges into your life at that time. It's not the time to switch the career necessarily. It's not the time to do some big emotional upheaval or move or whatever. And, sometimes you can't avoid these things. And, the answer is just be stronger, step up to the plate, do it. But you also then have some kind of external circumstance driving you to do that. So it's a little easier. You just don't want to necessarily invite massive changes at this point, but you can start thinking about it. All right. You can start playing around with it. Maybe if like one of the things you want to do is date or whatever, maybe you just start talking to girls. You're not trying to go serious or anything, but you're starting to move in that direction. Okay. Yeah. So this generally, this plan here will get you from 50 to 90. And then things change again, right? Because we don't want to just be free from porn for 90 days, at least not if you're, intelligent, okay? You want to be free from porn for good. And so how do we do that? How do we get beyond 90? Because I've seen a lot of guys who have completed 90-day reboots and then relapsed afterward. And, so probably the first thing to do here is explain what changes post 90. So why does 90 days even matter in the first place? Like, why is that the number? Well, for whatever reason, once you hit 90 days, your brain, that's kind of like the time period it needs to really deeply solidify this habit change. It doesn't mean that it's perfectly solidified. That could take, 120 days, up to 6 months even. If you're coming with like real intense usage and sexual dysfunction, that stuff can take several more months to completely clear up. But what almost always happens post 90, if you've done it in the way that I'm describing it here, is that you can't just slide into porn anymore. Like prior to 90, it's like, it's like putting on a dirty old shirt that you've worn a million times. It's just kind of like sliding back into this gutter of comfort. And you can just do it almost without thinking, like on autopilot. But post 90, you're usually going to have a little part of you that doesn't want to do that. It's just like there's going to be this resistance actually to using porn that will come up. There will be a natural roadblock built into your brain that you will have to override in order to relapse. So once you get post 90, you don't really need to be putting nearly as much energy into this stuff, right? Because it's just not necessary. You're not going to automatically relapse. You've got some guardrails put up neurologically in your mind. But there's still some mistakes that can be made. And so the big focus once we get beyond 90 is that frontline advancement and solving core pains. That really becomes kind of like the game of life in a lot of ways. Like that's what you do, is like, how do I make my life better? How do I reach my goals? And then how do I address whatever sort of big pains that I'm feeling, right? And if you do these two things, well, that's going to keep the porn at bay, because that's going to keep you from falling into a state of escapism. So let's talk about this part here, this frontline advancement first, because this is the part that a lot of people miss post 90. So guys who have been trying to quit porn for a while, for them, it's kind of like the Mount Everest of self-improvement. At least that's what I've seen with a lot of guys that I've worked with. And obviously that's colored by the fact that a lot of the guys I work with, they care enough to pay someone to get help to quit this thing. But I'm sure there's many other guys out here who think that way as well, especially guys with religious leanings, but even other guys who just really understand that it's screwing up their brain. They kind of like put quitting porn as like this Mount Everest of their personal development. And then once they quit, once they go 90 days, they feel like, oh, I'm done. I did it. I've finally succeeded. And they just kind of coast. They don't set a new goal. They don't continue to advance their life. And if you're not advancing, you're regressing. That's pretty much what I found, is that if you don't set new goals, if you don't have new juicy goals that really offer you something big and meaningful, then you're going to kind of just get stuck in the middle. You're going to get stuck in these default patterns that very quickly, without something bigger to drive them forward, will just start slowly devolving. And then eventually you typically relapse. And so that's one big thing, is you got to pick a new mountain to climb, and you got to go all in after it, right? Like, we're not just tiptoeing around here. We're like, all right, how am I seriously going to build this business? How am I, going to get this girlfriend? Like, absolutely. How am I going to definitely conquer these fitness goals? Like, you can start getting much more ambitious at this point, because you don't need to be putting in all this energy to prevent yourself from using porn anymore. Like, that's because we have those guardrails that have been built up through, the 90 days. So that's massive. That's probably one of the biggest pieces. And then the other piece here, which we've talked about, the solving core pains thing, that's always relevant, because that's the other big way I've seen guys relapse post 90, is that they have something painful that happens in their life. They get into a big fight, or they get fired, or, there's an illness in the family, or, they just reach an incredibly stressful point for whatever reason. And they stop paying attention to what's going on in their emotions. They stop paying attention to, the pain that's coming up inside of them, and they're not responding to it well. They're not properly sitting down with themselves and saying, hey, what do you want in relation to this? Okay, how can we win? Who will we be? And when that happens, well, then eventually that pain's just going to spike up so high that, you're going to reach for something to make things feel a little bit better. And if you have a porn issue in the past, well, chances are that's going to be one of the things that you're going to be heavily tempted to reach for. But as long as you're not letting that unmet desire reach critical mass, and you are advancing your goals, well, then you're going to be in an incredible position to live a porn-free life. And I've been now, I quit in 2012 or 2013. I think it was 2012. So, like 12 years now, 13 years, I've been free from porn. And it's great. You can do it. You can really, truly do this. You just got to be smart about it. You're going to have to dedicate some extra energy for a period of your life to make this happen. But then after that, the benefits are so huge. It's so positive. You gain so much discipline, so much self-knowledge, so much power returns to you, that everything else that you pursue after this feels like, you're almost on easy mode. Doesn't make life easy, but it makes you so much stronger that it can feel like that. It's kind of like, Goku on his way to Namek, and he's training in the gravity chamber, like, the 1,000 times Earth gravity, and then he gets there and he can go Super Saiyan finally, right? Like, very nerdy reference, but I know I got some DBZ fans out there. And like, that's kind of like what quitting porn is. It's like this ultimate rite of passage that will unlock your capacity to be your best self. And, that's not the be all end all. Doesn't solve everything in your life, doesn't give you a perfect life, but it gives you the power and the self control and self-awareness that will allow you to then go and do those things. All right. So yeah, that's like the big focus of everything here. It's like we got these different stages, and if you just focus on the right things at the right times, then you're going to be able to make incredible progress. You're going to be able to avoid a bunch of pitfalls and potentially save yourself years of trial with this kind of stuff. Like, I can't tell you the number of times I've worked with guys who have just reached like, a month or 2 months or sometimes 3 months and beyond repeatedly, and they just keep falling back. And like, you can spend so much of your life just having this issue kind of hanging over your head, shitting on your quality of life, your enthusiasm, your focus, and never getting clean. So like, get serious, dial in, and really pursue this stuff. So, yeah, I wish I remembered to put the link in the description, but if you look at one of the previous videos I've done, you can check out the training that I have that gives you an overview of how I implement this stuff. So it's like, I go deeper into the 3 questions, I go deeper into these inner keys, and I even set up a very simple habit methodology where just in a few minutes a day, you can lock all of this stuff in. All right. And then, if you're interested in that kind of stuff, I would love it if you checked out the Frontline Man program, because I would really like to help you with all of this stuff. I love this work. I love getting guys clean. And then I really love getting guys to that next level and chasing their bigger, juicier goals. So yeah, thanks so much for watching this, guys. Now let's get into some questions here. Seems like the chat's been doing pretty well. Yeah. Has anybody got any questions about quitting porn? Anything about quitting porn? Open season here. We've got people talking about Donald Trump. Excellent. Somehow messages are being deleted here. Oh, Derek's in here. What's up, Derek? Maybe you're deleting them. K-Dot says, thoughts on wet dreams and the chaser effect. So yeah, that's a real thing. So for those of you who don't know, the chaser effect is when you have sex during reboot, or, you masturbate, or basically you have some kind of sexual stimulation, then you're much more likely to be triggered afterward. And that's 100% true. All right. So, if you're trying to not do a hard mode reboot, you're trying to do a soft mode one where you're still having sex with your wife or something like that, then after you have sex with her, you're probably going to have a period of, up to 3 days of extra cravings where you're just going to have to be on guard. And the annoying thing is that, yes, this can be triggered by a wet dream. And some guys that get really freaked out about wet dreams, they feel like, oh, I wet dreamed, I relapsed. It's like, no, this isn't about... Rebooting your brain is not about complete and total semen retention. Some guys get really hooked on the semen retention concept. I think there's some value to it, but it's, I don't have any religious attachment to it. And I don't think it's as big of a deal as some people make it out to be. Because I've gone very long periods of total abstinence and, not much different than having a healthy sex life in terms of, benefits and whatnot. But the thing is, wet dreams, you can't control them. So just don't get worked up. All right. Don't beat yourself up. Don't feel like you relapsed. Yeah, they're weird as hell. And, they can feel kind of gross because a lot of times guys will have like kind of like porn dreams or something while they're rebooting. This is actually a sign that your brain is processing this. If you're having a wet dream, that means that your body is actually adapting. So in some ways they're good, even though they're weird and strange and uncomfortable. The other thing is, yes, you are going to have to watch out for the chaser effect. So if you have a wet dream, next 3 days or so, you're going to want to really be on point with stuff. You want to make sure that you're really following the plan and you're keeping your head in the game and you're not letting any cravings spiral out of control, because you might get some more intense ones. Jay says, my aggression and motivation went up after I quit. It's easier to focus, which is great because I'm a spaz. Yeah, focus helps a lot, and emotional control goes up a ton. Because if you think about it, like when you're using porn, that's just like pure limbic impulse, right? It's just like the most kind of animalistic part of ourself. We're just giving free rein over our life. And so when you learn how to like make that part at least go through the proper channels in your own mind, it keeps it from being so spasmodic which is kind of like what focus is. Focus is being able to get that part to behave and serve your actual holistic overall good. Celan found this through the email list. Great. Glad to hear that. I'm glad you found this useful. Sam says, can you walk through the cut method or its upgraded version? Yeah, so the upgraded version is the frontline framework, and particularly the 3 questions. What do I want? How can I win? Who will I be? And these are like, the reason why I moved it to questions is because questions are pattern interrupts. When you ask a good question, what it does is it creates a space, a break in your mind, because that's what a question is, like a void that creates this, kind of container that then we can fill. And by creating this space through asking ourselves questions, it interrupts the flow of autopilot in our mind. So the first and most important question we always want to be asking is, what do I want? And we don't want to necessarily always be asking that in terms of like the big life perspective. A lot of times, particularly when you're dealing with a craving, is you start small. It's like, what do I want this moment? You notice yourself scrolling, and the scrolling's getting a little bit racier, and it's like, hold on. What do I want here? Like right now? Well, I definitely don't want to be scrolling Instagram butts. What do I want? Oh, I want to be moving to this next task. Or, oh, I want to be making dinner. Or, oh, I want to be going to bed. All right. And so when you start there, it gives you something to latch onto. Next step is, how can I win? And with the super immediate stuff, it's usually pretty straightforward. But as you start moving into the bigger things in life, you start dealing with these unmet desires, you might need to get more, invest more energy into this question. You might have to brainstorm. You got to come up with some different options. And so you want to just figure out what's the most resonant option, the one that clicks with you the most. And so resonance is one of these inner keys that I talk about. And then finally, who will I be? So it's like, when we ask our first question, what do I want? We're giving ourselves the big goal that we're looking for in the moment. How can I win? Gives us a path to the goal. But then who will I be? That gives us the thought process so that we can walk the path to the goal. We need all 3 of those things in alignment. And so who will I be? It's just like, tapping into your identity. It's like, how does this guy think who loves following this path and achieving this goal? How about I think like him? Right? And so this is something I go super deep into in the Frontline Man course, because there's a lot of depth and nuance to all of it, but that's it in a nutshell. And learning how to like trigger these 3 questions anytime you get cravings is insanely powerful. And it gets even more powerful when you start implementing it through the journaling methods I teach, where you can actually pre-program your brain to respond to cravings. And so I'll probably do a deeper dive into that sort of stuff in a future stream. But yeah, that's it. Willing says, I know evening and morning routines are powerful and depends on personal preference, but in your opinion, which one is most essential? To do a serious preemptive every morning? For quitting porn, depends on the person. That's probably up there though, especially using the new format. If you're using the old one, that can be a little bit harder. But if you're using the 3 questions to guide your preemptive, you're thinking ahead of like, all right, I'm probably gonna get triggered after I get back from work today. So what do I want in that moment? How can I win in that moment? Who will I be in that moment? If you pre-program that, well, then you're going to do really well. And that might be the most powerful one. Yeah. Ralph Klimt says, Mark, what's your take on post-orgasm neurochemistry? I read about craving spikes at around days 3 and 14, and then CA30. I don't know what that means, but It varies. I would say it varies. I wouldn't say it's a super hard thing. You can say like, oh, for sure, day 3, I'm going to get a craving. I think it just varies, but certainly post-orgasm, I would say within the first 3 days, you're going to get it. And then potentially you might get one like 7 to 14 days later. And the reason I say that is because there seems to be evidence that after you orgasm, sometime between, like 7 to 9-ish days, 7 to, 12-ish days, you get a testosterone spike. And with more testosterone, you might get a higher level of sex drive. And so it's possible you might get some cravings from that. But what I've found is that as guys start doing this work, they begin to separate in their mind, in their own awareness, the difference between actual sexual desire and porn cravings. Because one of the biggest things that drives guys' porn cravings has nothing to do with sex. It has everything to do with those unmet desires I was talking about, like the stressors, the loneliness, the boredom, the, whatever. And when you start being able to sift those things out, that testosterone spike, that can almost just feel like free energy, because actual sexual energy is very easy to transmute, because that's what it's designed to be done with, right? Like, if a man, hunter-gatherer ancestor, he's horny, okay, and he doesn't have a mate, well, what does he do with that energy? He uses it to go build himself up, go conquer a new land so that he has access to new women, maybe, improve his standing in the village, goes and slays a woolly mammoth so that, that cute little girl, cave girl, Ugg, thinks he's, something's worth paying attention to now, right? So sexual transmutation is very straightforward with actual sexual energy. The problem is guys get confused and they think that this escapist desire that's driven by unmet pain is sexual energy when it's not. It's actually just pain. And so you can't transmute that in the same way. The only thing you can transmute that pain for is the solving of that core issue. Eric says, any favorite best practices or even mobile apps that help to discourage getting sucked into passive scrolling in the first place? Easiest thing is to just delete the apps off your phone. That's probably the best one. If you're not going to do that, well, then having a blocker can be helpful, or a timed blocker that blocks the apps during certain time periods, like particularly late at night. Another one would be like on YouTube, for example, you can turn off your history, and then that kind of eliminates its ability to suggest videos to you. And when you do that, it cuts down the algorithm. Really, anytime you want to avoid, in general, algorithmically generated feeds when you're rebooting, because they just, particularly if your past self would click on sexy imagery, those algorithms, they're trained to just, put some sexy imagery in there. And so that can lead to phishing and things like that, which I described in a previous video, but it's basically like you doing technically a non-sexual thing. I'm just scrolling Instagram, but a part of you knows that you're likely going to see something sexy eventually. And so, we want to avoid behaviors like that. So stay away from the Instagram Explore page, stay away from, Reddit, like Imgur, like these kind of things that usually have something that'll be triggering in them. Otherwise it'd be, blockers and timed internet usage and that kind of thing. The stat guy says, fishing for pee unconsciously has been my biggest issue in the past, i.e. just scrolling Twitter and eventually ending up fully relapsing. Yeah, that's a big one. You gotta be honest with yourself with that kind of stuff, right? And so that's where those 3 questions, like, well, what do I really want right now? Intentional internet usage is fantastic. The internet's an amazing place. You can find such like interesting things, useful things. You can get so much incredible work done there. You can have real entertainment. Just be intentional. Like, what am I trying to do right now? Go do that thing. It's like, oh, I want to learn about cars, or I want to learn about guitar, or I want to whatever your hobby is, then go do that thing. Okay. Do it intentionally. Oh, I want to follow this news story. Okay. Then go follow that news story. Just know what you're doing. I've had some guys where they actually, before they would engage in the internet, they would sit down, they would make a list beforehand of what they wanted to do on the internet. It's like, okay, I wanted to watch this podcast. I wanted to check in on this creator. I wanted to do XYZ, follow, get some basic news updates. And then once they checked those things off, they were done. And they had a fulfilling internet usage time period that didn't lead to any zombie scrolling or relapsing. Dari says, any view on long-term effects on testosterone if going beyond 90 days? Do the spikes you get taper off? I would just say that, like, testosterone, I got this from Brute to Force, and I think he nailed it, because it's something that I've been saying in much longer language prior to this. But he's saying testosterone is an as-needed hormone. Basically, like, if you're living a lifestyle where you are aggressively chasing your goals, taking chances, living boldly, that will have the biggest impact on your fundamental testosterone levels, that you can get. That combined with health, like, lift, sleep well, eat decently, like those three things, plus living, a goal-focused lifestyle, that will absolutely boost your T levels significantly. And the thing is, porn disrupts all of that. And so guys say, like, oh, well, I need to jerk off every 7 to 14 days so I can get this testosterone spike. No, you don't. You just need to live like a fucking man on a mission, and then you're going to have a constant testosterone spike. Okay. Sam says, can you talk a bit about dopamine replacement? My experience is that giving myself alternative forms of relief is very important. So as long as those behaviors are not addictive. Yeah, that's a really good point. So when I quit porn, I didn't know any of this stuff I'm teaching you guys. The porn recovery space was very much in its infancy. And so like I did things maybe not the optimal way. So for example, I was addicted to porn and video games. And when I was quitting porn, I just played a ton of video games. All right. And is that ideal? Probably not. But did it get me the result I was looking for? Yes. Was it directionally correct? Yes. And, I was playing like games that I knew didn't have any triggering capabilities. I think during that time period, it was a lot of Gears of War. I think Gears of War 3, and I was playing a lot of that competitively. And, just a violent, gory game shooting aliens, all right? There's no hotness in there. And so like that for me, it worked. And so I don't think that's the worst idea if you're having a really hard time, like I did, getting clean. So doing something like that, maybe you just watch a bunch of movies, hopefully non-triggering ones, or you get really into politics or whatever. It's like these things aren't ideal, but like if something's got to give inside of you, you can lean on that in the worst moments. I would say in general, the part that I didn't have back then was the whole addressing the core pains and, starting to advance my life. And I didn't have that clear in my mind. I think though, if you're doing those things, you're addressing your core pains, you are making frontline advancement towards your goals, the need to lean on those kinds of like lower brow sort of dopamine fixes is significantly reduced. But at the same time, I do not recommend trying to remove all pleasure from your life while quitting porn. Like I've rarely seen guys, who have any sort of significant porn problem quit porn while also cutting out, their video games, their junk food, all their internet scrolling and going like pure monk mode. That's very difficult to do and often a much harder process than what's really necessary to quit porn. Like you can always take care of that stuff later. Like I took care of my gaming problem after I took care of my porn problem, because my porn problem, that was causing me way more issues. So I had to prioritize that. So as long as you give yourself permission to go on this journey of personal improvement, and you don't put yourself in this position of thinking that I got to do it all right now. Right? That's this whole grasping mentality of like, if I'm going to do self-development, I'm going to do it all at once. I'm going to make it super optimized. Ugh! It's like doing that pretty much guarantees you're going to crash and burn. So tap into your dignity a little bit. I've talked a lot about dignity recently on this channel. It's about realizing you're already good. You don't need to sprint to perfection, right? Like basically, like what I struggled with was this feeling that if any moment spent where I'm not my perfect self was just me being a piece of shit. And so I felt like I had to just keep forcing ahead. I had to do it all at once. And that's what kept burning me out. And that's what made it so that I could barely do anything, that stress and that pressure and that feeling of inadequacy. But if you realize, hey, I'm good. I'm good whether I quit porn, whether or not I have an inherent fundamental worth. It takes the pressure off. And then all of a sudden I can just focus on, all right, here's the most important thing for me to do right now, which is quit porn. And then, I can knock off the other stuff later. I can start leveling up this part, right? It gives you permission to take things at a more reasonable pace. Willing says, what insight do you have for crippling anxiety around women and the shame of a PMO addict? That's a good question. Well, the heart of it is what I was just kind of hitting on, this dignity thing, where basically a lot of guys feel like their worth is defined by what women think of them. And you can tell if you're operating in this paradigm on some level, consciously or unconsciously, if the thought of a woman rejecting you terrifies you. Because what that means that you're basically looking at her opinion of you as more important than your opinion of you. And you're in this grasping state where every interaction is this high stakes situation where if I don't get her affirmation, then I fucking suck. And if you're in that mindset, then yeah, you're going to be filled with massive amounts of anxiety because, you can't control her. You can't. Even if you're, the most manipulative red pill scumbag in the face of the, earth, you're still going to be in this position where you cannot fully control her. So there's going to be this uncertainty of like, oh shit, she might reject me. And then I'm going to have to deal with the fact that I suck. And like, that's really where it comes from. So if you can learn how to honor your own worth, own dignity, and focus on being a man that you want to be, and instead of trying to get something from her, you just focus on what you're sharing with her. Being like, I'm going to share my attention with you. I'm going to share my goodwill with you. I'm going to share my sense of humor, my interests, my time, maybe even my money. Maybe I'll take you on a date. You're the guy who's handing out the goodness. Well, if she doesn't want it, well, guess what? You're not empty. Doesn't matter. It's like, okay, I'll find someone else who wants to, bask in my goodness. And that's really the biggest part of it. And I would say that the porn thing, it really does amplify that graspy, needy sort of feeling because one, you're constantly reinforcing this sexual hierarchy in your mind. Every time you use porn, you're always trying to look at the best porn, which means that like that's the highest value, the most important thing, the hottest girl. And so like when I'm around a girl, it's like I'm operating in this whole like sexuality defines importance. And then you got the shame of it. It's like, oh, what if she found out? And it's like that keeps you from being as authentic, as natural, and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, quitting porn, one of the biggest things that people report is that it's much easier to talk to women. Let's see what else we got here. If I'm not busy, ACT says, if I'm not busy and full of work and accountability, I fall into so much PMO. What's the problem? Sounds like you don't know what to use your energy for. It also sounds like maybe there might be some mindset issues where it's like, if I'm not being productive, I suck. Can't say for certain without talking to you more, but yeah, I mean, fill your time. Like you got to actually decide what you want with each day. And if you don't decide what you want with each day, well, then you're just going to default into pleasure seeking. So, that's why making sure that you got a plan for your day, which is one of the biggest things. We call it the lock-in, the daily lock-in. We do it at Frontline Man for the members of our dojo. And it's like every single day, guys are locking in. They're going through a process that gets them clear and focused. Because if you got to know what you want to use your energy for, if you don't want it to devolve into escapism or unconscious activity. So that guy says, I find it interesting how I thought not PMOing would make my libido shoot up uncontrollably, when in reality I find myself to be much more centered when it comes to sexual urges. Yeah, that's what happens. You start learning how to actually hold and be present with your sexual energy. That's the thing, is like so many guys, like they're basically like castrating themselves through porn use, because what porn and masturbation train you is that my sexual energy is something I got to get rid of. It's bad. I got to get it out. Got to get it out. How many times have you heard guys, talk about porn or masturbation from that way? It's like, I got to get the demon out of me. the reality is just you're running away from your own sexual charge and you don't know how to hold it. That your inner pipeline of energy is just weak. You don't know how to actually be present with your own masculinity. And so you got to make it go away. And so, yeah, if you quit porn and you start developing this level of sexual self-mastery, then yes, it makes a massive difference. Ralph says, doesn't a PMO addiction tie in with gaming? It could. Similar, definitely both high dopamine behaviors, and they're both kind of like status replacements, but they're not the same thing. Gaming can be done in moderation, I would say, depending on your goals, and also your proclivities. Like for me, I can't do competitive gaming. It's not that I can't. I don't want to because I get too hooked into them. I like them too much. It's one of these things that I just enjoy, and it releases too much dopamine for me, and I'll just get hooked on it, and then I won't be able to focus on other things because I'll be thinking about the stupid game. So, porn functions similarly to that, but other, single player games and, maybe just more casual multiplayer stuff just with friends, not a big deal at all for me. So, that's one of those things where you're going to have to figure out what it's like for you. Willing says, I feel like Gollum sometimes when urges hit, yet I strive to be like Aragorn, the humble servant with fire of hope in the depths. Love it. CJ says, are you Christian? Yeah, I'm Catholic. Darius says, have you met many women that have issues with porn addiction? I'm guessing it's less common, but curious to know what their experience is. Yes, I have. Women quit porn so much easier than men in general. Not always. There's some who have hard challenges and whatnot with it, but in general, it's not as big of a problem for a girl who really decides to quit, unless, from what I've seen, there is some kind of emotional damage there. So I haven't worked directly with many women. I've had women go through my courses and say they're really helpful and that I helped them quit porn and that kind of thing. But it's a different game. And I'm not purporting to be any sort of expert with it, but apparently, women do use porn and their numbers are increasing regularly. I don't know how many of them are actually addicted so much as regular users of it who, if they wanted to quit, I think most of them could without too much effort. Sam says, I think gaming addiction is born out of misdirected productivity where PMO is more relational. Could be, but not always. You can use both for both. I mean, you can drown loneliness in video games and you can drown work productivity issues in PMO. I've definitely seen both cases of that. But in terms of a general statement, you might be, I probably agree with that. Hadid, please tell tips to improve focus during the reboot. What do you mean? What kind of focus are you talking about? Slavko says, hey, Mark, are sexual fantasies normal during reboot, or do you consider it a relapse? No, it's not a relapse. You got to draw the line here with, if you intentionally use porn, you kind of commit to it. It's kind of like one of these things where it's like your own call, where if you pulled up porn and you looked at it for 2 minutes and then you shut it down, would you call that a relapse? I wouldn't call that a relapse. I would call that a slip. If you masturbate, I would always kind of count that as a relapse, even if it wasn't with porn. You're probably doing porn in your brain, and just the way that masturbation impacts the rebooting process, I would count that as relapse. But if you just fantasize, no, that's unrealistic for most people too. The fantasizing, the reflexive fantasizing is usually one of the last things that fades when a guy is quitting porn. So, to expect yourself to be perfect with that during the 90-day process is unrealistic for most people. That being said, you don't want to indulge the fantasizing because that becomes its own little, internal porn theater. And obviously it's probably going to lead to a relapse if you let it go, unaddressed. Kidda says, how would you go about telling a woman that has interest in you about going on a reboot without explicitly going into a porn addiction issue? You could just be like, I'm doing this little self-improvement challenge where, I'm not doing any sex or anything right now. I'm just focusing on connecting with people and putting my energy into advancing my life. I'm just doing it like that. It's kind of like a brain chemistry thing. And so, I'm down to take you out to dinner, hold your hand, all that kind of stuff, but, not going to be hooking up right now. And just leave it like that. And frankly, if you're in the initial stages of a relationship, that's for the best. I think if you get into the sexual component too early, you're almost always like setting yourself up for major pain and heartbreak at some point. Remy says, what does the sign say in the back? It says, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. So it's like a Navy SEALs training motto, and it's holds very true. Axe says, why is the primal part of us so stupid? And can it get smarter with better algorithms running through it? Absolutely. I would say that actually the primal part of us, I refer to it more as like the emotional aspect of us now. It's actually insanely intelligent. But the thing is, it needs to be presented good truth. Like the way that I look at it is that our emotional self is like the captain. Really, at the end of the day, without emotions, without our biological drives orienting us in life, we have no direction. We cannot generate desire from our prefrontal cortex. It always has to pass through our limbic system. And so, like, really, the emotions at the end of the day are what drive us. They are the captain. But our intellect is kind of like a tool of the emotional self, right? Like, if you think about the evolutionary theory, I still have mixed feelings about different parts of evolutionary theory, but if you just take it, and run with it for a second, it's like, all right, we started as these, very simple creatures. Simple urge was to survive and reproduce, right? And then, this gets more complex, right? It requires navigating an environment, it requires navigating a social hierarchy and all this kind of stuff. And then we develop this limbic, primate part of our brain. And this part is just kind of like taking those core desires to survive and reproduce and adding more nuance into them. It's like, oh, well, in order to do that, I gotta, manage my social standing. I gotta manage my, these relationships. I gotta, pay attention to, my environment and all these kind of things. And so what the prefrontal cortex is, the last part to develop evolutionarily speaking, that's like a tool set of still these core emotional desires. And so that's why we look at it as kind of like a more subordinate piece, right? Like we naturally do this anyway. So like, if you're on the verge of starvation, no one's going to be asking you, are you depressed? Are you feeling socially fulfilled? It's like, no, that doesn't fucking matter because there's a deeper need that's got to be addressed. And so, when we start getting out into this tertiary level of like the intellectual and the rational, it's always, if we want it to be useful, it's got to serve the emotional desires. So the way to think about it is that our primal emotions, these are the captain, and then the first mate is our intelligence, our prefrontal cortex. Most guys get this completely flipped. They try to get their emotions to serve their intellect, and they try to become this robot who just always does the rational and optimal thing, and it doesn't fucking work. And if it does, if you do pull it off, well, then you've basically repressed or killed off your emotional center, and now you live a dull, painful, lifeless existence. So ultimately, we want to just kind of use we want to equip our emotions with the best information. So applying that to something as simple as just dealing with a porn craving. You can say, oh, my primal self is being so stupid. He just wants porn. Oh, doesn't he know that's bad? It's like, well, maybe he doesn't in that moment. So the intellect's job is to be like, all right, you're just looking at this one little second here. Yeah, if we use porn right now, that will feel good. But if we keep using porn, look at all this bad stuff that goes with it, right? It gives it the more accurate picture. It equips your emotional mind with a more full picture of what you're choosing. It's like, do you want this life of, crippling porn addiction and, dysfunction? Or do you want to get clean and face a little bit of discomfort right now and live a far better life? And we can only get to that comparison through the use of the intellect. So the intellect gives the emotions then a better option to choose from. And so that's what a lot of what we're doing with our self-talk is providing that ammo to our emotional self to, basically want better things. Thanks, Slavko. that guy. Yeah, I talked about Flatline earlier in the call, so you can go back and watch the stream. But yeah, it does exist, and the way how long it lasts, it really depends. Good, Dari. Glad you're getting value here. Axis. A non-healthy person has corrupted its decision-making system. How to fix it without having a mentor or a coach? Is it possible through Metascript or therapy? I mean, it's definitely possible. You just gotta, if you're not getting any sort of outside perspective, you're gonna have to generate all your insights organically, which just takes a while. And something like the Metascript method 100% makes that much more rapid. But yeah, it's possible. It's just harder and takes longer. So, all right, guys, this has been great. I'm gonna have to get going here, but really appreciate you all tuning in. Really love getting to chat with you. I'm gonna be doing another stream next week. I'm gonna be doing another one on rugged productivity, and I think I'm gonna do that on that. So I'll let you know. I'm trying to do better about giving more advance notice on these, but yeah, I also want to get a lot better at breaking these things down, creating clips and stuff like that. So even if you miss the live stream, you can still get the good parts of it. But it just takes a little bit of work getting all that, because, man, like, I'm all about producing the content, but then breaking it down, uploading it to a million platforms and everything, man, that is time consuming, especially when you got other stuff to do. But anyway, thank you guys so much for being here. Ooh, yeah. I'll see you all on the front lines, and catch you next time. Peace.